Awesome. Welcome everyone to the Mother Tree Network and to our special guest, someone who I've been waiting a long time to talk with, actually, Nina Simons. Hey, Nina.
Hey, Aminita. Good to be with you, finally.
Yes. So we start every conversation off with the question, and that question is, what is good? What is good for you right now? What is good that you see in the world? What's good in your body? However you want to take it. What's good, Nina?
Nature's capacity to heal and regenerate is really good. She heals me all the time. And she's my go-to source for stabilizing and remembering. And I'm so grateful for her love and support.
Mm, me too. Honestly,
Yeah, right?
phew, wow.
No matter what happens, she's there.
Wow. It was so hard before I had that appreciation of nature as she is there waiting for me to tune in, tap in.
I remember as a little kid, I grew up in New York City, and
Mm-hmm.
I was only about a block or a block and a half from Central Park. And that was where I went for comfort and for solace when I needed it, which was often. And, um, so I learned that young, even though it was a city.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Central Park is huge.
Yeah, it is. And it's
I
got great trees.
Yes. But we have something about Central Park in common because I grew up in New York also.
Oh,
Yes. But my
okay.
memory of Central Park was actually one of stress because when I was a little girl, I got lost in Central Park.
Oh,
Can you
wow.
imagine, like, when I was around 3? Uh,
Oh,
and who knows how long I was truly lost. But in my mind, I was lost and it
oh.
seemed huge. Um, And I didn't think about that memory until you just brought up that's where you went as a little girl for solace.
Yeah. Oh, that must have been so scary, Anita.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
my other little girl memory of Central Park is that one day I took all of the stuffed animals from my bed and I brought them to the park in a shopping bag and I put them in a tree. And then I left them there to give them their freedom and came home. My parents, of course, were completely freaked out. And by the time I got back to the park, they were all gone with new homes. So, yeah, I've been a liberator a long time.
I was just gonna say, it seems like your Bioneering work started a long time ago. And for those of you who don't know yet, Nina Simons is a co-founder of Bioneers, which we'll get into in a little bit. Um, but I want to get back to that impulse to take your stuffed animals out of your home and to place them in trees. Like, how old were you when you did that?
I'm not sure, maybe 4 or 5, I don't know. Something like that. I was pretty small.
Wow. And your parents somehow let you go to Central Park by yourself?
Yeah, I had a lot of freedom. It was one of the great things about growing up in New York. And I'm not sure, honestly, Amanita. I could have been 6 or 7.
Mhm.
I'm not sure
But
of my
still,
age.
that's still really young. So that
Yeah.
with this, and I think this is a generational thing. It
Oh,
is New York is also kids tend to have to grow up, be a little bit more independent earlier than I
yeah.
think in more suburban or maybe not rural places. But would this have been in the 60s that you were doing
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. It
Mhm.
would have been in the early 60s. And so it was not as dangerous, probably, as it might have been when you were there. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Which would have been the
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Yeah.
isn't it, I mean, not to belabor this point, but isn't it wild how here I am in my late 50s, here you are in your late whatever it is. And
Mid
we were
60s.
both
Yeah.
and we were both we have that park, we have that early childhood experience in common.
Yeah. Sweet.
Mm. One of the reasons why I wanted to interview you is because I heard you interviewed on another podcast, Awarepreneurs, and at the very end, um, the host Paul Zelliger said, "Well, Nina, what's one thing that you would recommend that people do, or if there's one thing you want to leave people with?" And you said, "Get a species mentor." And then you went on to explain what that is. So tell us what a species mentor is.
Well, Anita, I am a very eclectic explorer, so I get guidance from a lot of different sources. And in this instance, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I got guidance to listen in nature for a species to be my mentor and to then study that species through however long, I did it for a good year. And I went out, I live at the edge of a national forest, so I'm very lucky to be surrounded by nature. And at first I thought, oh, it'll probably be a crow because I always talk to the crows and they talk back to me. But I really was listening, and it was a plant that reached out to me, a very unusual plant that's endemic to this region in northern New Mexico in the high desert, and it's called Apache Plume, and it's really beautiful, but very strange. And so I just got it that I needed to learn about this plant and from it. And I observed it through a year of seasons. And I found that even though we're in a 100-year drought out here, that plant is proliferating across the landscape like nobody else. And it's got a quality of fertility and resilience. It has these very unusual seed heads that look sort of like Cyndi Lauper's hair. They're like puffy pink,
Yeah.
plumes. And and so as a result, when the wind comes, it scatters the seeds all around it. And so it tends to grow like in bunches or in lines. And and when the seed heads are done blooming, then it looks like it's spiky, but it's actually really soft. But it looks spiky so birds don't land on it. It just has all these really interesting adaptations. And and so that's what I meant by let a species mentor select you.
Mm.
And and I find, I mean, I'm recently getting over a weird condition called lichen planus, and it's got me learning all about lichen because lichen are amazing. And
Yes.
who, right? So I'm just constantly learning from and with nature and really turning to her as my teacher
Hmm.
rather than a resource.
Can you tell us the name of that plant again?
Yes, it's called Apache Plume. In fact, I can change my background and show you what it looks like. You want to see?
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hold on. Okay, let's see
So
how quick I can do it.
so for all the so for all the people who are listening to the podcast, you're gonna have to switch over to YouTube to get a little picture of this Apache plume. And I see it, Nina. I see
That's
it.
what it looks like.
And you know what's interesting? It looks a little bit like it could be in water. The way
I know.
it has these filaments kind of waving.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
It's a little bit like a jellyfish in the air.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So how
This
does a
is in
girl
its pretty phase. Sorry.
No, no, say that?
I said this is in its pretty phase.
Mhm.
It's not always so beautiful,
Mhm.
but it's magical.
Right. And so you
Yeah.
spent an entire year kind of working with this plant, watching it through its many phases.
Yeah.
And
Trying
can
to
you
understand what it had to teach me.
Yeah, so I want to know. Can you tell me one or two things that you learned?
Well, I learned that sometimes it's useful to reveal your full beauty And sometimes it's useful to have camouflage, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and I learned that fertility is something to be prized, right? Whether it's a fertility of ideas or cross pollination, and I learned that growing in community is a great resource for all of us.
Mm, mm.
And I learned that, you know, looking spiky can be useful if you want to deter somebody, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
as you speak, I'm reminded of this idea of not being dogmatic.
Mm.
Sometimes if you like, I'll speak about myself. I'm a Virgo and I have a social justice kind of background. And that can lead me towards dogmatism. It can lead me toward what's the right way. I'm going that way and I'm holding my ground. But if you look
Yes.
at the natural world, as you said, even at this plant, it's constantly shifting. And sometimes it is useful to camouflage.
Yeah.
Sometimes you
Yeah.
don't need to be seen.
Yeah. It's so true. Yeah.
So, so you've got like a decade on me in terms of chronological age. And I wonder, like, for you, have you noticed yourself going through seasons of being seen or not being choosing not to be seen, or you know you
Absolutely. It's a great question. You know, what I've noticed, Amanita, so I'm
oh, call me
66
Aminata.
and I've, Aminata,
Aminata.
I'm sorry,
That's okay.
Aminata, thanks.
Yeah.
Um, what I've noticed is that the first thing that became clear to me after turning 60 was that I was less concerned about what other people think,
Hmm.
and I could really shed another layer of that conditioning. And um, I mean, I, like you, have a really strong justice orientation. And I think I'm more aware of how our identities tend to shape us and how we have the opportunity to cultivate or shed, conditioned responses. Um, I mean, I've been investigating my own white privilege and white supremacy conditioning for a long time. And I had this revelation with a hairdresser recently because I was talking to her about what it feels like to go gray. And
Mm,
she said, it's especially hard for people who have been pretty privileged. And it had never occurred to me to recognize, oh my gosh, right? I mean, that's a privilege
right.
that I was completely unaware of.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, it's changing me a lot. And I
Hmm.
feel like I'm in the middle of a transformative process to grow into my next phase of life.
Hmm.
And some of it involves slowing down, of course, and getting,
Yes.
right? And giving myself permission to rest more so than I ever have. And being more deliberate about my choices. Because I realize part of my conditioning has been to want to say yes to almost any request that comes my way. And
Yes.
can't do that anymore. Ain't working.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I just want to high five you on that.
Ah,
Because sometimes when I feel like I have to say yes because I don't want to disappoint somebody,
yeah,
or I don't want to seem to not care, you
right.
know,
Yep,
or I don't want to seem to not be living up to my values. You know what I
yep.
mean? These are the things
Oh,
that
yeah,
have pushed my buttons to make me say yes when maybe the season is slow, you know?
yep. And I'm not a Virgo, but I have a lot of planets in the sixth house, which is the Virgo house. And so I'm very oriented towards service. And, you just can't serve everybody's needs. You gotta, and bringing my own needs for equilibrium and self-care up to a balance is a priority now more than it's ever been in my life.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I don't want younger women who are not in their 50s or who are not in their 60s or 70s. I really just want to give you permission now. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yes,
All the way.
because yes. And especially with women who are in those childbearing or child rearing younger children years. I mean, I know phew, it's just like there's a lot of internalized pressure that, am I worthwhile if I'm not out here, burning it, giving it in a public way, in a more, in the collective realm, or if I'm more family focused, or if I have a sick person, my body has a chronic illness.
Absolutely. And you know what I've been finding, even though I'm childless by choice,
Mhm.
that all the women I know who've had kids, like it's one of the greatest acts of leadership I've ever seen is raising a child. And especially in this day and age where half the women I know are working full-time jobs and raising children. And like, excuse me, if that isn't a recipe for exhaustion, I mean, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So I so agree with you.
Yeah. It's just been, but like you said, it's taken me a while to get to this point. And I think one of those, actually, speaking of species mentors, one of the things that slowed me down were trees.
Aha. Yeah,
Yes, giving permission and asking for attention.
yeah. I've had a wonderful experience with a tree um, near my home because we live with a constant awareness of wildfire danger. And there was a huge wildfire, the biggest in New Mexico's history, a year or two ago. And I reached out to a friend who's done a lot of studying with a Peruvian practitioner. And I said, can you teach me something that can help protect our home? And she said, yeah, make an altar around a tree that you love. And that became my practice,
Mm,
was putting flowers around the base of the tree and feeding it with water and sometimes with wine and with prayer and sending the prayer down into its roots and up into its branches. And what I found was that it really helped me feel the kind of sacredness that Indigenous people feel in relationship to the land that holds us, that I've always admired but never quite felt so much before. So that's another practice that I would heartily recommend to anybody. It's just beautiful.
mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm, mm. You know, I, I love.
Whoop, can't hear you.
So Nina, I definitely want to talk about your book. But what you just said makes me think of this poem by Aurora Levins Morales, and it's about the grandmothers, 10,000 grandmothers coming to her in a dream, and how the grandmother, at the end of the poem, she says, and what they're saying is they need the rest of us to come. And
Ah,
I feel like what you did when you followed through on this advice with that offering around the tree and feeding it with your prayers, your intention, wine, whatever, flour, whatever else you gave it, um, that just feels like grandmother
mm,
wisdom. That feels like you kind of you moved yourself into the realm of elder when you started that practice.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. Thank you. I mean, really, I've just been feeling more and more called to deepen my own relationship to the invisible world. And I think it's something that can strengthen all of us if we choose it, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially in this time that's so wacky.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to switch your book, not switch. I'm going to turn our attention to your book, Nature, Culture, and the Sacred. A Woman Listens for Leadership. So this is called Nature, culture, and the sacred. A woman listens for leadership. Um, so I have a few questions about it because I loved it, and my friend Rachel Bagby appears in your book. So
Oh, Rachel. Rachel is my teaching partner. I adore Rachel.
yes, clearly. Um, but in line with what we were just talking about, with you making that altar to the tree in your backyard, and you saying spending more attention, putting more attention into the invisible world. Um, Tell me about, like, if you were to say, okay, here's where Nina is today, but 10 years ago, where was she on the spectrum of nature and the sacred?
Oh gosh. Wow. 10 years ago. You know, I've my journey has been evolving for some time here, like all of us, I imagine.
Mhm.
And 10 years ago, I was more single focused on strengthening and liberating the leadership of women and girls. Um, I was doing that partly in a partnership with Rachel Bagby and others. And I was leading retreats. And I think my discovery about how my identity as a woman was affecting my life led me to this really long, involved inquiry into the nature of leadership and how we're all changing it. And and then I started working with a lot of diverse women and girls and realizing that all of us, myself included, came to that work saying, "Oh, I'm not a leader." And so, how we're reinventing and redefining leadership was very important to me 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years, I would say that my uh, my commitment and my engagement with racial equity and justice has deepened profoundly. I've really been on a steep learning curve, which I imagine I will be on till I die, um, about what that means and how to be a good ally. Um, and and especially in the last 5 years and since turning 60, my exploration into the invisible world and how to deepen my own practices and my own relationship to ancestors, to dreams, to intuition, all those things has really deepened. So that's how I would kind of describe my journey thus far. And the book kind of traces that arc, really.
Yeah.
Because the first, what happened in making the book was that I write a talk for the Bioneers conference each year. And each year it's kind of a huge deal for me because I feel like, who am I to spend 15 minutes? What do I have to offer the world that's going to matter and help? And it really makes me come to grips with all my self-worth issues and all that. And so a lot of the chapters in the book are actually from talks that I wrote over the years. And the third section of the book is really where culture and spirit get woven in, and the racial equity and justice pieces become much more obvious and evident. So, and
Hmm.
and I think the other thing that I would say is that my focus on women has expanded to being a focus on everybody
Yeah.
because we all need to strengthen the feminine within us, and uh, and we need to strengthen it. I can't. And hang on one sec. I have to put a big rock in front of my door because my dog. Okay.
Okay. So before you pick up where you left off, Nina, I just want to say we live in the world where we have dogs, we have toddlers, we have partners who don't know what we're doing, right? And
Exactly.
that's just part of the web of our lives. So
So
I just was cracking up listening to you try to tell these people around you, listen, I'm in a podcast.
I love I love how you wove in your husband's beautiful violin, this
Oh
violin
yeah.
start. Thank you. That
Oh,
was
you're welcome.
um
So you were saying that
so
right now you're like
yeah,
thinking about everybody. You used to just be focused on girls and women, and you've
right.
expanded.
Yeah. And you know what I've realized is there's your dog. What I've realized is that men in this country, especially, but maybe in the whole world, are kind of in a world of hurt right now. And
Mm.
and it's partly because the archetypal masculine has been so twisted, but it's partly because the feminine has been so repressed in not only in us as individuals, but in the whole society, in our organizations, in our businesses, and in our governance. So I actually am feeling like I got to take the message bigger, broader, because while we need women in leadership, we need everybody in leadership right now.
Yes, and we need the feminine, as you said, that feminine principle in
Yeah.
leadership. So, and that also to me is another thing about the grandmothers. You know,
Mm,
as you level up or you up level, you know, uh, things start to shift in terms of like who all that you are mentoring or gathering, you know, or feeding.
yeah. Well, and the growing sense that, I don't know how much time I have left, but I do
Yes.
have a really strong drive to give this magnificent world the best of whatever I got.
Mm. Okay, so we're going to take a little break there and then we're going to come back and talk about racial equity. And we are back with Nina Simons, co founder of Bioneers and the author of Nature, Culture, and the Sacred. A Woman Listens for Leadership. So, Nina, as I said, my friend Rachel Bagby, who is your co teacher and friend as well, appears in this book. And it was such a surprise to me. I didn't know what she was doing these days. Um, but one of the things that really struck me about this was when you and Rachel, you tell the story of when you and Rachel were convening groups of women from various racial groups, and you were having breakdowns. Like somehow with each group there was this what seemed to be a common purpose, but then you couldn't get past uh, distrust, distrust of you, distrust of the sponsor of the group of the foundations. You know, there's a lot of pain out there, and so I want you to speak to that a little bit, like what you see is different now, like what you learned from those early efforts to convene people. Uh, and for those of you who can't see it, she just sighed. Just one or two things, Nina. You don't have to tell us everything. I know that's probably a whole nother book, but you know what stays with you from that, and I'll just say this: I really appreciated how one of the things that you said was that when you're bringing people from different backgrounds together, especially people from oppressed or marginalized groups, in order for them or us to not feel oppressed and marginalized inside of the group that you convened them into, there have to be enough. There have to be a critical mass so that people feel flanked enough
Yeah,
to be themselves and to feel like they have some safety. And I would say also to feel like they have some space to be different
yeah.
because, you know, we can go a little bit more into that, but let's start with what it was like for you, you know, in those moments of breakdown and what you've taken away from those experiences.
It's a great question, Aminata. Um, and there's so many things. There's one whole chapter of the book where Rachel and I convened a group of very skillful facilitators to
Mhm.
surface all the lessons we could about how to convene diverse groups in a good way. And that's all in the book, which I was really happy and honored to share. Um, you
Yes, and
know,
I love that. I really love that, and I appreciate it. And for all the facilitators in our audience, I really do recommend this book, if only for that chapter. If you're used to convening groups or you have some fear about facilitating, I recommend this.
well, and what you were referring to, Aminata, is like I learned that from a book called Women Take the Lead by Linda Tarr Whalen, that until you have at least 30% of any marginalized or you know, any marginalized group, then people don't feel flanked enough to feel safe. But also, we did exercises that have to do with introducing yourself to each other through all your identities, because there's so much that's packed into those identities, that's some of it conscious, some of it less conscious, and the more we can make it conscious and name it, the more useful it is, and the more kind of brave people can become, because we are not our identities. I mean, in a way we are, and we're so much bigger than our identities. And recognizing that there is enculturated learning that comes with those identities that we can choose to shed or to cultivate, gives us a great deal more freedom in how we become who we were meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And also, there's a wonderful quote that I remind myself of regularly from Malidoma Somé, who said, right? Who said, conflict is relationship's way of asking you to go deeper.
Mm.
And so many of us have conditioned responses about turning away from conflict and avoiding it. But
Yes.
when it comes up in a group, it's really important to turn towards it.
Mm.
And and it's a way, for people who either have passed as white or are white, it's a way for them to exercise what I've heard called discomfort resilience,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I think, one of the things we really need to strengthen in ourselves. Like, we're not
Period.
that far, right? Yeah,
Period. I mean,
yeah.
think about it. For me, this comfort resilience, it just came up in a yoga workshop. We were doing some eye gazing, and my partner was very uncomfortable. She was
Ah,
so uncomfortable that I noticed I started to lose my breath.
yeah,
I started to get uncomfortable, and I even thought, do I need to get up and go tell the instructor that this person's uncomfortable? You know what I
right,
mean? So
right.
discomfort resilience, like being grounded and balanced in the face of someone else's discomfort. Wow. Or
Yeah.
my own
Well,
discomfort. In that case, it was someone else's discomfort.
Well, and that comes from, I want to give credit where credit is due. That comes from a woman named Camila Majied, Majied. And she does this beautiful diversity work called prosocial behavior. And she talks about how there are three pillars of prosocial behavior. And one of them is discomfort resilience, and one of them is um, fierce compassion. And the third is cultural humility, which is so good, and so necessary. So those are some of the lessons that I've
Mm,
gleaned from lots of years. And I have to say, Aminata, that my focus and drive to learn about how to convene diverse groups well comes from my experience with nature. From learning from having helped launch a seed company that was all about biodiversity, and learning from the natural world that ecosystems that are rich in diversity rebound much more quickly after trauma than a monoculture. And so I was like, oh, well, we're an ecosystem. Of course, the same is true for us, anything that's true for nature. So that was like, this is really important. I just got set on that path really early on.
mm-hmm. Hmm. And when I think about, what we can learn from nature in terms of racial justice or equity, inclusion work, um, I think of it's like the foundation. Truly, the foundation with nature is what you said at the very beginning. You can go out and find somebody who loves you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be good enough. You don't have to get the terms right. You don't have to recognize your privilege. You don't have to. I mean, just show up and just let something in. that wants to hold you. And and remember that with
Yeah.
all the challenges and the discomfort that comes through it, we're still part of an ecosystem. And even if we don't like each other, even if we don't think we can actually create this multiracial democracy that we want, we're still in it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no pulling out of the ecosystem. So it's almost like, wow. So how do we be in it and and stay patient and breathing and you said cultural humility. Maybe it's humble about ourselves,
Yeah. And curious, you know,
curious.
and turning towards difference as a virtue, not a
Mhm.
challenge, right? And I love how you said that. That was beautiful, Aminata, because for me, I think I hear a lot of white people talk about diversity work and they talk about the hardship and the challenges, but I don't hear enough from people talking about once you get through the hardship and the challenges, the experience of beloved community is so heavenly
Mm,
that why would you choose anything else?
mm,
Right?
mm,
I mean, and that's, I mean, to me, it's nectar, you
mm,
know?
mm, mm.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that. To you, it's nectar. Yeah, so there's like a pleasure driver, not just a
Yeah.
you should driver, you
Right.
know.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and both are probably necessary. I was listening to Valerie Carr and she was talking about sweet labor. Love is sweet labor. Like sometimes you just got to do the labor. You just got to wipe up the mess from the kid who threw up, not because you feel like it or because you love them in that moment.
Yep.
And so there is that labor, good and bad. You just got to show up. But
Yeah.
but we but wow, we do need the nectar.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. We,
because did any of us just show up here just to be working it hard? I mean, to just
yeah.
endure?
Well, and it's one of the things that I love that I've learned from my Indigenous mentors is they say the Creator put us here to celebrate life. And I want to celebrate while I do the work, you know,
Mm.
and I agree. I mean, one of the things about racial equity work that I refer to often is I heard Van Jones say once that doing this work is like walking through a room full of garden rakes
Yeah.
because you can't walk through the room without stepping on a rake and getting whacked in your head. And it's true, but so what, right? Nobody died from getting whacked in the head by a garden rake. So there we go.
Mm.
Uh-oh. So sorry.
That's okay. If you put yourself on mute for a minute. Um, so we're gonna take another break and come right back. So Nina, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about cultural humility, like what that
Mm,
means to you now.
yeah. Well, it's a great question. Let's see. Whew. The first thing that comes to mind has to do with my own reckoning with being a product of a culture that has white supremacy embedded in it. And I remember when I first heard that phrase, I remember kind of going, ugh, really? And, but I've been in a long inquiry and dance with it. And I've realized it's real. And even though my background is as a Jewish person, which feels to me like I pass for white, not that I'm born white exactly, but um, there is real assumption and implicit bias that I have discovered in myself that you know in a room full of mixed race people, I'll often see the white folks speaking up first and loudest, for instance, or thinking they know the answers without having curiosity and exhibiting respect for other people. And um, And so cultural humility, for me, it means don't assume that whatever you learned about your culture, whatever you grew up with, is necessarily right or real. Um, as a Jewish person, I'm in the process of navigating what's going on in Israel and Palestine, Gaza, and it's painful as heck, and I wouldn't have said heck anywhere else. Um, it really sucks, to be honest,
Yes.
and it's awful, and it's deeply humbling. Because I have a cousin who lives in Israel, and you know they are so sure that their response is what's necessary and correct. And from my vantage point, you know, it's evidence that um, when we polarize into victim and perpetrator, they're just two sides of the same coin. And, for my people to be perpetrating this ethnic cleansing and genocide is horrifying to me and so, so painful
Mm.
and so humbling. So that's what I mean by it. You know, I think it's a great question, and I'm living into it all the time because I'm having new layers of it revealed to me all the time. But, one of the things that I have observed, for instance, I was in a white fragility training with mixed race folks. And what I saw was that the white folks in the room had a really hard time listening with their hearts. They were all listening with their heads. And there were Black and brown folks talking about their experience. And it was so painful that I was sitting there weeping, watching other white folks like rationalize and defend. And I thought, well, there's a place where cultural humility is needed, because where's your heart in this?
Yes.
You know? So
Yeah.
that's the best answer I can offer at the moment.
Yeah. And I appreciate it. I just want to speak to, you know, I need to practice cultural humility too, because it's like being willing to investigate what I don't see
Yeah.
normally. You know what I mean? And, I think what you said about the courage it takes to live in your heart,
Mm.
especially in the face of exactly what you're talking about, what's going on in Gaza right now. I mean, it feels so much safer to stay in your mind about it. So I think the willingness to go to the heart level
Mhm.
is that is what the grandmothers can bring, you know,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that willingness, the resolution to stay in our hearts,
Yeah.
so I hope that all of
Yeah.
us can come from there and stay there and not let other people take us into rationalization. And it's many-sided, like you said. So how quickly perpetrators become victims and victims wow. You could just
The hurt people. There it
hurt.
is.
There it is again and again and again. And,
Yeah.
you know,
And if we don't manage to shift the cycle of revenge,
yeah.
frankly, we're screwed. It
Yes.
just can't go on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's
Yeah.
where, you talk about uh honoring the feminine in all of us. Honoring the feminine in all of us. What does that feminine in each of us say? Whose children are these children?
Yeah.
you know and if we listen to the feminine in all of us, or to the earth mother, which of us is not her children? So thank you so much. So that humility, we start off by talking about your plant mentor and how they guided you for over a year. You learned about camouflaging and, changing your appearance and, all of that. So, Nina, thank you for your longevity and your resilience, your commitment. Thank you.
Oh, it's my honor, and I feel like we all come into our flourishing at different phases in our lives. And I'm a Capricorn, so I was a late bloomer, and um, and it gives me great joy to be able to offer inspiration and reminders to everyone else of whatever phase you're at, it's okay, you know? I mean, I had no idea what I was supposed to become when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I only started to explore in my 40s. And so it takes whatever time it takes. And, we learn from nature. Things are ripe when they're ripe and not before and not after.
Okay. I we not now you want to start us on a whole nother interview, Nina Simon, but we're gonna leave it right there. You are great where you are. Appreciate the moment, the season you're in right now. All
Yeah.
right. All right. Peace and love, everybody. See you next time. Oh, Nina, if people want to follow
Yes.
you or stay in touch with you, where do they go?
Thanks so much for that, Aminata. Oh, there are lots of places they can go. Well, Bioneers.org is a great resource that I would recommend for everybody with wonderful podcasts and videos and all that. If you want to read the introduction to my book for free, you can go to Bioneers.org / NCS book. That's Nature, Culture, and the Sacred Book. If you want to check out where I'm doing online teaching, that would be at Bioneers Learning or ninasimons.com. All of those things.
Beautiful. And I will be sure to put them in the show notes. All
Thank you.
right. Peace,
Great
everybody.
being with you.